So without further ado then, welcome to this webinar tonight on the exhibition Read the World, Picture Books and Translation, which is currently on at the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art in Amherst in the United States. This event is part of an ongoing webinar series exploring children's literature in translation, organised in partnership between the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing and the organisation Outside in World. So my name's Sophie Hayward, and I'm just quickly going to introduce to you the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing here at the University of Reading. So we're based in the UK at Reading, and we bring together colleagues working on English, Spanish, French, German and Italian language publishing and book history. And we work also with specialists from the business school and also from typography, working in book design, printing and typography in both Latin and non-Latin scripts. We have a really strong interest in translation studies and in children's literature in particular. So we're so excited, over the moon, to be working in partnership with Outside in World. And so now I'd like to hand over to Patricia Billings. She is co-founder of Millet Publishing House with its wonderful range of bilingual books for children. And she is also trustee of Outside in World. So now I'm going to hand over to Patricia.
Thank you. I'll wait to be spotlit before I start speaking.
I think you're in the spotlight, Patricia.
Great, I'm here. All right, so hello from New York City. Thank you everyone for being here from all around the world. I hope you, your families and communities are as safe and well as can be. So thanks for being here with us today. Thank you to Sophie Hayward and the Center for Book Cultures and Publishing at the University of Reading for being the most wonderful partners in co-organizing this webinar series. As Sophie mentioned, I'm here representing Outside in World as trustee of the organization and a longtime colleague since the early 2000s. And I also want to honor the co-founders of the organization who are here today, Deborah Halford, Alexandra Strick, Edgardo Zaghiti, and also our wonderful intern from the University of Rochester, New York, Katie Hurwitz. I really want to shout out students today. I am over the moon that we have a student on the panel, and it is you all who are going to take this work forward. So go you. I'm happy you're here and all support. So as many of you know already, Outside in World is dedicated to exploring and promoting children's books in translation. What you may not know yet is that our amazing and only of its kind collection of over 1,600 children's books translated from many world languages to English is now available to the public for the very first time at the library at the University of Portsmouth in England. So we gifted this collection to University of Portsmouth this past summer. It's out in the library, it's set up, and it's there for everybody, for students, teachers, academics, researchers, and children, right? It's there for children and anybody in the public who wants to access this collection. So if you get to Portsmouth, please go and visit, check out the resources they have about the collection online. And if you are a student or a researcher and you want to talk about a project with books in the collection or any kind of collaboration, do get in touch with the librarian there or with Outside in World. And Emma's going to put some info in the chat about that. So this physical book collection is in addition to our database of over 1,700 books translated from world languages to English that's on the Outside in World website. So that's Outside in World. So today, I'm super thrilled for this webinar because, like I have been for all of them, but this is really the fruition of something that happened after the last webinar, which was about in May, which was about translation outreach in schools and the move online, and it focused on Britain. Right after that webinar, I got an email from Regina Galasso, and who's a professor at UMass Amherst. And she said she had attended the webinar. I was the US speaker who was there. So she said, hey, do you know of any similar projects in the US? And I said, no, I don't think so. Anyway, Regina and I got to talking and thinking. She invited me to virtually visit her class at Amherst College that was responsible for curating the exhibit at the Eric Carle Museum. And Sophie Haywood then said, hey, for the next webinar, I want to talk about collections and curation. And boom, that was it. I was like, well, Regina's working on one. So this is wonderful. It's how these kinds of our network, this hub that we're creating here really, comes to fruition. So the exhibit at the Carle, that's what the museum is called, looks absolutely amazing. It opened today, and check it out in real life if you can go. If not, check out the resources online. Of course, we're going to learn a lot about it today. I think one thing I really want to note too is how the museum is using the really high profile name of Eric Carle, whose books in English, like The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and many more really essential books, have been translated in hundreds of languages. So they're using the Eric Carle name and this beautiful platform museum to lift up children's books translated from other languages to English. So to me, this is really a beautiful model of how an organization that has a high platform uses it to increase the visibility and accessibility of children's literature and translation. So panelists and all your colleagues, thank you for your vision, for your curation, and also for your solidarity with the broader children's literature and translation community. Okay, so here are our panelists. I'm going to give a little bio info in the order in which they're speaking. Regina Galasso is the director of the Translation Center and associate professor in the Spanish and Portuguese Studies program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We call it UMass Amherst here in the US. Her publications and teaching highlight the role of translation in literary histories and contemporary culture, especially in the context of the Spanish-speaking world. She is passionate about creating and supporting ways to make translation more visible to the general public, to encourage greater understanding and appreciation of this needed service and intellectual activity. Since 2018, she has worked with school districts and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to improve translation and interpreting services and expand language access initiatives in schools. She is also a literary translator and is currently writing the text for a picture book for children about translation. Courtney Waring is Director of Education at the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art, and she creates, conducts, and collaborates on a wide array of programs, providing links between visual and verbal literacy. I just want to stop at that, visual and verbal literacy. I love that. And fostering the confidence to appreciate and enjoy art of every kind. She has previously worked in the education departments of the Delaware Art Museum, the Barnes Foundation, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. David Feinstein is the Carle's literacy educator, and he has taught reading and writing with a wide range of ages, from preschoolers to college students. He enjoys collaborating with artists, educators, and families to explore the ways in which picture books invite us to discover, create, and share our own stories. Caroline Seitz is a senior at Amherst College, majoring in Spanish and English. She is interested in American Southern Gothic literature, women's voices, and stories from the Spanish-speaking world. She is passionate about access and storytelling. Her favorite children's book is Owl Babies from 1992, written by Martin Waddell and illustrated by Patrick Benson. So that's the intros. On to Regina.
Thank you. Many thanks to Patricia for the introduction and for her support of this project and enthusiasm. And thank you to Sophie Haywood and the team at the Center for Book Cultures and Publishing and Outside in World for inviting us to be here today. And thank you to everyone who is joining us. And we are grateful for this opportunity to share our exhibition, Read the World, Picture Books, and Translation with you. And we look forward to your feedback and hope that you will share our project with others and reach out with any questions, comments, and ideas, even after today's presentation. For me, this is just the beginning. And I also just really want to thank Caroline and David and Courtney for working on this project with me. I learned so much from you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start our presentation by sharing the project's background and inspiration. Can we have the next slide, please? So welcome to our region. We are located in Western Massachusetts. We're not an urban setting. We're surrounded by farms, fields, parks, hills, and mountains. And the cultural life here is in many ways determined by the institutions in the area. And what are those institutions? The largest, the University of Massachusetts Amherst, is a public research university and a close neighbor of 4 colleges: Amherst College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke College, and Smith College. And together we are referred to as the 5 colleges. And there's a nonprofit organization called 5 Colleges Incorporated that helps the campuses to achieve as a group things that they can't achieve individually. And each college has its own strength, of course. And there are opportunities for undergraduate students, UMass Amherst graduate students, and faculty to collaborate among the 5 colleges. And in addition to UMass Amherst and the colleges, we have a number of museums in the immediate area. Not so far down the road, we have Springfield Museums, and that includes the Amazing World of Dr. Seuss Museum. And there are the on-campus museums. And in Amherst, we have the Emily Dickinson Museum and the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art. And professors and students working together with these museums have allowed for beautiful collaborations like the one we share with you today. And I also want to acknowledge that in our area, we have a lot of translators, literary translators. So we have a lot of translators at the university and the colleges and just in the region as well. And so there is so much translation activity going on here with projects, with publications, with courses. And one example that I want to highlight and acknowledge is the work that my colleague Tal Goldfein does. She is a translator of picture books and has done some amazing work with translation for UMass students and with the Carle. And I know that my collaborators from the Carle are going to share more of the work she does. So this work that we're sharing here today emerged from a specific course, but I see it as just the contribution to something larger that I think that a few people are working on in our region, and hopefully we'll join together with people all over the world to do something big. Next slide, please. So I want to zoom in a little bit on my role and the context that led to this project. I am not an expert on picture books or children's literature. What led me to this project is my interest in finding ways to promote awareness of translation, especially in Massachusetts, and hopefully a little bit of that trickles into the rest of the world and mixes with some of the existing projects wherever they may be. So in my research and teaching and creative work, I study the role of translation and its many dimensions in literary histories and contemporary culture, and especially in the context of the Spanish-speaking world. And I also seek to create and support ways to make translation more visible to a general public and to encourage a greater appreciation of this needed service and creative and scholarly activity. Something that has impacted me a lot is that I lead the UMass Amherst Translation Center's work with kindergarten through 12th grade schools in Massachusetts as they improve their language access efforts. And to date, that has mostly been in the form of workshops for bilingual staff on the foundations and best practices of providing interpretation and translation services for families who need or prefer to communicate with their child's school in a language other than English. when in the current conversations about language access, the focus is largely on interpreters and translators who provide these services. And through my work with K through 12 schools and the people that I've worked with, I've learned that in order for any language access effort to be effective and successful, it can't only fall on the shoulders of the providers. Everyone in the school community has a role to play to support language access efforts in schools. So I've been thinking about how do we do that? How do we get people who don't rely on translators and interpreters to get essential information to recognize their own role in the value of language access, equity, and diversity efforts? And how could all of that transform how the general public thinks about language and translation? So some of the next steps that I've been dreaming of would be to bring greater awareness of literature in translation and language access industry to high school students, to let them know that this is one of the largest industries and there's a lot of jobs to be had that don't only involve being a translator or an interpreter. And that could happen through workshops or other opportunities with the aim of working with them through experiences that impact intellectual interests, academic and intellectual interests, and professional trajectories. And so I have a plan that I'd like to work on for high school students, but then what about the grade school students? How can they participate in this larger effort of translation awareness? How do we expand their knowledge and awareness of translation? And I am aware of and applaud those efforts in the UK that I learned about in May of 2021, hosted also by the Center for Book Cultures in partnership with Outside in the World. And all of the presenters were so inspiring, and I'd love to connect about how we can bring some of those projects or a version of those projects across the Atlantic. And I want to know, how are these projects funded? How many people are behind them to make them work? So, I'd love to connect. And for anyone who wasn't part of that event, but would like to connect, please be in touch. So all of the vision of expanded translation education for all led me to revisit sooner rather than later my university students' roles in translation activities. I think for students who are interested in translation, US universities usually offer them the chance to, through a course in a language department, do translations for a community partner organization. And while there are all good intentions behind this kind of approach, it can sometimes be complicated because it mostly involves students doing a translation for the community partner. And it can get complicated because sometimes the students don't have the language skills or the translation skills to do the job. And then it makes it even more complicated if they don't have the knowledge of like mental health issues, say, if that's the focus of the community partner. So many complications come up. And then these like free student translations can also create a ton of work for the instructor, who is often asked to teach a translation course, but might be a literary critic and might lack the experience in translation as a profession. So the free translations also sometimes don't help the community partner plan and budget for their language access needs because they're just thinking, okay, we're going to get lucky, we're going to get a student, they'll come do the work at no cost. So I don't know how far this really gets us. So I don't want to can all those initiatives, but speaking from my experience, the outcomes can be helpful, but they never really become as large as we'd like them to. So I'm thinking, and there are, of course, ways to do this in a systematic and helpful way in targeted like translation certificate programs. And we have some of those at UMass Amherst, but sometimes the question is, how can we better incorporate translation into courses so it could have a lasting impact on the community? So, and then I think of how can students support the many aspects of the translation profession? How can they set the stage so that the community how can they set the stage so that as a community, we're ready to receive and support translations and translators? How can students be active advocates or ambassadors of translation? And I know this is a role that some of you talked about in that translation outreach in schools event, but in the US, we need greater translation education. So, so with that in mind, it brings me to the course that I taught in fall 2021 at Amherst College. And so, why do this kinds of thing? And here are some of the obstacles that prohibit a greater understanding of translation that my students and I, with the support of the Carle, tried to overcome with the exhibit. Just general ideas that translation is fast, cheap, and easy, thanks to all the translation buttons we have on our devices. Translators' names not on the cover. Hopefully this is a trend that's going out of style, but it's still around that we hear that readers don't want to read a translation and that they don't sell. Also thinking about how readers don't think much about translation. They know they want to read Don Quixote, but when they go to the bookstore to buy Don Quixote in English, they don't think like, which translation should I get? Should I read it, 2005 translation, or should I read a 17th century translation of Don Quixote? So there's that. Translation is overlooked in literary histories. In general, there's little awareness of the authors we know and love as translators, or translation's role in making writers global. And I know that there are initiatives to shift these ways, but I think for the general public, and even for some really educated people in our community who aren't translators, or that they don't know about these things. And then also sometimes educators don't present translations as translations. I've heard that in high school English classes when they're studying short stories and they read a short story by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, no one mentions that it's a translation, right? Gabriel Garcia Marquez writes in English. So those are the things we're kind of tried to overcome and prevent for future generations. And then, what did we aim to do? What did we aim to do? We tried to get our audience to make translation more visible in our community. Think about the necessity of translation and how it applies to accessibility, equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. In Western Mass, we are very, very, very active with all of these efforts, but the language access piece is missing here. We want to inspire language learning, inspire people to read more translations, and innovate university undergraduate students' role in supporting translation. So the course the specific course that we all took part in, next slide, please, is called Translation Roots of a U.S. Literary Landscape. And I developed this course for Amherst College, and as I mentioned before, each college has its own strengths. And the Amherst College students were the ones that I knew could get this sort of project going. I had met them before in another course that I taught at Amherst College with Ilan Stavins on translating classics, and I knew that if I wanted to launch this kind of thing, it was the Amherst College students who were going to help me do it first. So I want to also thank Professor Sarah Brennis at Amherst College for inviting me to teach this course while one of her colleagues was on sabbatical, and the other support I got from the Amherst College Center for Community Engagement. So here you have all of what I tried to do with the students in this course. We highlighted literary connections between US and Spanish speaking world via translation, also looked at the role of translation in literary histories and current literary activities, acknowledge translation as a professional and collaborative activity, and then while doing this, contribute to our own literary landscape in Amherst by collaborating with the Carle. So what were we doing? How were we combining like literary studies with making this exhibit? So we read literary texts in Spanish and English and scholarship on translation, all while thinking through how we could use that material to make our own contribution to the promotion of translation. We invited guests to our class: Patricia Billings, Lauren Schimmel, Juan Carlos Cavillo, who is a translator, a Spanish translator of Emily Dickinson, and Vanessa Perez Rosario, who works on Julia de Burgos. So we were, took the inspiration from all those guests, learned from them, and now I think it's time to hear a little bit from the Carle about their part in all of this. So I'll hand it over to my collaborators from the Carle. Thanks.
Thanks, Regina. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Waring, and I think I'll be spotlighting a little bit. You'll see me soon. So it really has been wonderful working with Regina and Carolyn and the Amherst College students to work on this exhibition. I'm going to talk a little bit about the museum now, and then segue over to my colleague David to talk more about the partnerships and collaborations we've done in our reading library. Totally confess, the next couple of pictures are pure visual bait. If you haven't been to the Carle before, we hope that this might twist your arm a little bit so you can come and visit us, as well as the other literary locations that Regina had mentioned a few slides back. So the Carle, if you've never been to us, this is, we are celebrating, 2022 will be 20 years old. And the late Eric and Barbara Carle co-founded the museum because they really wanted to inspire a love of art and reading through picture books. The museum doesn't quite look like this in February. Just imagine all that grass covered in snow. Next slide. If you do come to visit us, you'll experience different things. We have 3 galleries. One is always dedicated to the art of Eric Carle, and then 2 other galleries that might be solo exhibitions, group exhibitions. These 3 spaces are always rotating. And we also have an art studio, which really celebrates process over final product. We say we're thinking with our hands, we're exploring materials in new ways. It's, of course, it's great for kids, but grown-ups love it too. And then we have our reading library, which is a non-circulating collection, and it is unique in how it is arranged. It is arranged by illustrator's last name, so we can highlight the art in those incredible books. So we are an art museum. We're not a children's museum, but as an art museum, we sure do see a lot of guests who are about 2.5 feet tall. So we're always kind of thinking across these spaces how we can create unique experiences for the wide range of visitors that we see, from toddler age, thanks David, to picture book collectors, picture book authors, illustrators, which we have quite a lot of in Western Massachusetts. So we've had the pleasure of working with Regina before. She's reached out to us and talked about projects that she'd like to work on with students in former classes. They've done translation of The Very Hungry Caterpillar and shared it at programs. And during COVID, we had re-envisioned a space in our reading library. Prior to that, to these book exhibitions like Read the World, we would have a summer intern, and it was their job to curate an exhibition in digital reproduction in our reading library. So in the 8 weeks that they were at the museum, they would be working on getting the permissions, getting the scans, the reproductions, the text all together. And it was a lot of work. And because it was the reading library, we really wanted to celebrate the entire book, the physical book. So during COVID, we switched out and started to create book exhibitions. And it was last summer that Regina had reached out to me and said, well, we'd love to kind of talk about another project again. We've done projects before, and it was really just the serendipitous. It was the perfect time. At that point, we had already done 2 book exhibitions that we had kind of curated internally with our fellow colleagues, but we really wanted to see how we can do a community curation in this space so we could hear additional voices. So David's going to talk a little bit about how we partner with other collaborators focusing on translation, and then we'll hear from Carolyn, who's really going to dive into how this collaboration worked and what they worked on during their fall semester. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, as Courtney beautifully mentioned, and as we can see in those beautiful shots of all the different spaces that we have in our museum, as literacy educator here at the Carle, I'm always thinking about the ways in which all of the different ways that we can share stories, right? Through talking and playing and singing and moving. And our collaborations with local partners, some of the institutions that Regina mentioned earlier, as well as several others, have really helped us to enrich and expand all of the ways that we invite storytelling for guests of all ages. So, for example, we are very fortunate to have a dance studio in downtown Amherst called Center Dance. And we collaborate with them to create these wordplay programs where we read a book together and then we dance the story. So thinking about our bodies and movement as one way that we translate or share a story or an interpretation of a story is something that we love to think about with our partners. Of course, the verbal, right? Singing and the tactile, touching. We have our partners at Berkshire Hills Music Academy down the road who come and do a Braille story time. You can see here a picture of our partner, Mary Westgate. Mary comes and she sings, she shares musical instruments, and she introduces readers of all ages to Braille. So she's reading Braille story times, and kids are learning, right, another form in which we can read and share stories. And of course, our theme today being translation, we have story times in lots of different languages. And a lot of that comes out of, again, Regina gave us a great overview of our area. It's a very multilingual area. Another aspect of being in a place with so many rich institutions, colleges, universities, is we have folks coming from all over the world to study here. So our bilingual story times, we've tried to reflect some of the languages that our most frequent visitors are bringing with them. Sometimes our partners in leading these bilingual story times are actually parents and members of the museum. So story times in Spanish and in Mandarin. And our collaboration, as Regina mentioned, the great work of Tal Goldfein, who's also at UMass Amherst in the Spanish and Portuguese Studies program. Over the last couple of years, we've had the good fortune to work with her. We had a great story time celebrating the release of her translation of a beautiful Israeli book, The Mermaid in the Bathtub, published by Restless Books, which you'll hear more about later. Of course, she's translating that story from Hebrew to English. We've become a much more virtually focused organization. Of course, we have a beautiful space, but we've been able to connect with folks all over the world, through online learning and online story times. And we worked with Tal to create a story time of The Very Hungry Caterpillar in English and Spanish, which is still on YouTube if you're interested in checking it out. And most recently, we've hosted some bilingual story times in English and Portuguese, in which Tal has brought her undergraduate and graduate students from the Portuguese program at UMass to read their original translations of some classic Brazilian picture books. So we're looking forward to continuing that. Tal will be returning in the spring to share really that work that Regina mentioned of students who are really leading and spearheading this work to create publishable original translation of very important picture books. So, you know, as Courtney mentioned, our library space has become an exhibition space where we're highlighting important books and themes in children's literature. When we were approached by Regina with this idea, we just jumped at the chance. Of course, Courtney spoke to the projects that we had already done with Regina. And I love the image that Regina shared of Eric Carle's translated titles, right? You know, and to go back to what Patricia mentioned at the top, which is just that Eric Carle is an international figure. His books are popular all over the world. And the books that we have in our reading library, when they're Eric Carle books, they do reflect that, right? There was a part of a very small world languages section of our reading library, but for the most part, the books in our library space are in English and they're published in the US. So this is a great opportunity for us to expand our collection and really celebrate books from all over the world. So I'm going to hand it back over to Regina to tell you a little bit more about the details of the show.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks, Courtney. So here we go. Here, let's go to the next photo, please. Here we are in the reading library at the Eric Carle Museum. This is what it looks like with our exhibit. I should note that someone from the Carle team did the design that you see here on the walls. And on the slide, you also have an overview of what's there in the exhibit, an overview of the number of books, authors, illustrators, translators, languages, and publishers, a list of the languages in addition to English that are represented, and the themes, the three themes. So David and Courtney, when we started working on this, said, okay, you know, we have the overall idea for the exhibit, and then, you know, we come up with three themes and we have these three sections. So Caroline is going to talk to you in a bit, a little bit about the text here that we created to kind of introduce the exhibit. But I want to stay with for right now, how the exhibit was organized. And also, we didn't really get that intro text down until we figured out the themes. And so figuring out the themes and the titles, this is things we were doing in the classroom. So, you know, how did we do this? We knew we had to come up with the three themes. We came up with these themes or sections as a class. We talked about the literary and scholarly texts that we were reading, and then we would make lists of ideas for themes. And we would do this on the chalkboard. We would do it in a shared Google Doc. And then I think, you know, maybe we spent a few weeks doing this. It's all kind of a blur. But this happened over time, and then I would kind of categorize the themes and then identify emerging themes from the themes. And then finally, as a team, we came up with these three sections: meet translators, see languages, and expand the story. And while we were doing that, so our academic and our literary readings informed the direction of the themes, but then simultaneously, the students were looking for translated books that they were interested in. And this was mostly books translated into English from the past 5 years. And that I kind of left up to the students and their own interests to find the books, gave them some sources for where they could find children's literature and translation, but I really just left it up to them and their interests. And so one of the themes that I wanted to mention that didn't make it into what you see in the reading library, but something that we kept coming up with over and over again was that we really wanted to make people aware of all of the texts around them that are translations that are not recognized as such. Like Pippi Longstocking and The Little Prince and Pinocchio. And that was really important for the students, that the audience would know that that some of these texts that are celebrated and critiqued on a daily basis are translations. So Courtney and David had this idea and gave us a little space outside the reading library where we could put some of those titles in a case as an intro to what's found in the reading library. Okay, next slide, please. So I should say that the themes and the books that the students selected kind of informed what the themes would be, as did the literary and scholarly texts we were reading, and that they had to choose books that were like published within the last 5 years. Those were the limitations. So it was really important to us to feature translators, but like we figured, how are we going to feature translators if really every book in the exhibit is a translation? So I'm going to read the text that we came up with for this Meet Translators section. Here we go. Translators read a book in one language and then write it in another language. They interpret the text and consider the illustrations, the audience, the other features in order to create the story in a new language. Here is a sample of the work of 4 professionals who spend their days translating and promoting translation. Can you find their names? So we wanted to tell people about this section and then also ask them a question to get them to interact with the books. So this section really emerged from the need to make translators visible. Just kind of informally, I've given talks about translation for like, first graders through 4th graders, and ask them, who are the different people? What are the different roles in book production? And many times they don't say a translator. There's the author, there's the artist, there's the people who tried to sell the book, but they never really say translators. So we wanted to make that visible. So we aimed for to include translators who've published a number of titles, and that we ended up with Danielle Kahn, Ruth Ahmedzai Kemp, Lawrence Schimmel, and Helen Wang. And we chose 4 to 5 titles per translator. So these 4 translators are the translators of 4 to 5 books that are in the exhibit. We aimed for a variety of languages. If we had a bigger space, we would add more translators and more books and more languages. But we really hope that other editions of the exhibit, could feature other translators. And what else did we do here in this section? Next slide, please. So not only in this section, but in the other sections, we tried to include a kind of like surprise element or something that we think would be interesting to the visitors. So here we have 3 books by Lawrence Schimmel. So Lawrence is the author and translator of all of these books, right? So we wanted to have this. So I believe the order is bedtime, not playtime. Is first in English, and then the Spanish and Catalan translations. But he'll have to confirm the order. But that's exactly it. I mean, does the order even really matter? So we wanted to have this surprise element in the section to show that translators work in a variety of ways and have different creative activities. And this was the relationship that some of the authors we studied had with translation and literary production. So we wanted to do things like that. And let's see. And so that's what you get in the C translators section, I'm sorry, Meet Translators section. And now in C languages, David, were you going to just talk about this one, or should I keep going?
I'm happy to jump in.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Regina. And I think one of the really important things that Regina highlighted there with the creation of the vinyl text and that long list of obstacles that Regina shared earlier. I'm really excited, and you'll hear more from Caroline in a minute about how we navigated those obstacles, because I think one of our biggest challenges, Regina mentioned limitations of space, is how we take some of these really big, sometimes complicated ideas around translation and make it accessible very, very quickly for visitors who might be quickly walking through our library space, or might not have that as much experience thinking about some of these questions of translation. So the example that Regina gave with that question in the vinyl is just one of the ways that Regina's group, I think, masterfully negotiated those obstacles to really get folks engaged with the books on the shelves. So the second theme, C languages, love that title. Again, going back to visual literacy, right? These are multilingual books that show languages together and are inviting questions about translation, right? Like the kind of question Regina kind of answered for herself. Which version was created first, right? How are the languages similar or different? Is the author, as in the case of the Lawrence Schimmel book that Regina just shared, also the translator, right? And asking visitors to think and look carefully at these books, specifically tuned into looking for languages. And again, as an art museum, we're really interested in the art and illustration of these books. We are also really interested in the design elements of books. So I think one of the goals for this part of the exhibition was to really present a range of ways in which languages are presented and represented, right? To really see not only lots of different languages, but to think about how they're interacting in this medium of the picture book. So a book like Daniel and Ishmael, translated from Spanish into English and Hebrew and Arabic. It's a remarkable multilingual picture book that tells the story of a Jewish boy and a Palestinian boy who grow up in separate communities and become friends kind of by chance on a soccer field. Is a really beautiful story. It's also really beautifully designed, just the fact that it opens right to left, the way that a book in Hebrew or Arabic would open, right? We see languages side by side, both vertically and horizontally, right? And again, going back to book design, we love to geek out about the parts of the book, that gutter, which is the part that divides the left from the right-hand side. Love how this book uses the gutter to kind of show the barrier, to reinforce that barrier between these characters and cultures. And throughout the book, that kind of barrier gets crossed in mirroring kind of the storyline of the book. A book like We All Play, a really wonderful book celebrating playtime, the connection between children and the natural world, by Julie Flett, one of my personal favorite illustrators. It's a bilingual text, mostly in English, with Cree words appearing kind of after the English, as you can see in this example, right? But in the same font, in the same color, right? So these languages are kind of being integrated to some degree, right? Also, so many of the books that we've included have glossaries and pronunciation guides in the back matter, which are just such critical learning tools when we think about, integrating these books into the larger goals of our learning as world citizens, right? A book like Vamos, Let's Cross the Bridge, which just won the American Library Association's 2021 Pura Belpré Award, honoring Latino authors and illustrators whose work best portrays, affirms, and celebrates the Latino cultural experience in children's books. This is a book I love. I read it with my 3-year-old at home all the time now. It's a story about these pals, Little Lobo, their dog Bernabe, and some luchadores, La Oink Oink and El Toro, who kind of get stuck on a bridge between sister cities in 2 different countries. Raul III is from El Paso, right on the border of America and Mexico. And they kind of make a party out of this difficult situation. But I love kind of the busy comic book style of these illustrations and all of the different ways that English and Spanish words are presented, right? We see English and Spanish integrated into the illustrations on walls, on signs, on the bridge itself. We see English and Spanish kind of trading back and forth in the speech bubbles. We get objects like the telescope on the top labeled. So a lot of just incredible intra-iconic text, right? And I love how even the onomatopoeia is different across languages, right? Even those sounds representing traffic sounds and animal noises, we get to see those differences. A book like Nana Akua Goes to School, again, another winner, just won the 2021 Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Award for Tricia Elam Walker. This is a book about Zura, a shy girl who is kind of apprehensive about bringing her West African grandmother, her face kind of bears traditional tribal markings, to meet her classmates. And you can see the end papers of this book present the symbols, these Adinkra symbols, and we see those again in the quilt that are brought in for this kind of show and tell. So I love how languages are told kind of are shared integrated into the images through this kind of object of the story itself, and how the end papers are kind of providing a key. Love the C languages section and what Regina's group did with that. I'm happy to keep going or pass it back over to you, Regina, to talk a little bit about our third and final theme. I'll
Go ahead, David. Keep going. I'd love to hear you talk about the books, but I mean, or I can say something about this section, and do you want to jump in and talk about some of those books?
Sure, would love that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here in the expand the story section, here we really wanted to talk about like the why do this? You know, why do we need to care about translation? Why do we need to read translations? So here we say, you know, books in translation help us to grow as readers and citizens of the world. These books are recent translations from publishers who are committed to sharing stories from around the world. Which books are you most drawn to and why? So here in this section, we really wanted to kind of, you know, really get the visitors thinking and kind of getting away from the ideas that translation is mechanical, translation is for people, is a service for people who can't understand the language, and here celebrate that we all need translation, because if we didn't have translation, we would only be able to access the stories of the people who write in the languages we know. So this is our moment for why people need to read translation, and for you know, kind of getting at why reading translation, it might be a little bit different from books created in your own language, and then asking everyone to think about these books on the shelves. What are they drawn to and why? And you know, it's not, of course, there are more publishers who are supporting translation that we could add here, but here is just a sample. And, you know, with Expand the Story, we also really wanted to emphasize the openness of translation, that it's kind of, you know, not just about a source or a beginning and a target and an end, but there's so much more, and it's so much more expansive. And we really hope that it encourages people to continue to read translations, to buy translations, to support translators. So David, did you want to just take us through a quick tour of a couple of the titles?
Yeah, I'm going to be really quick because I'm excited to hear more, to share more about how we're engaging audiences and thinking about these big questions. I'll just share a couple of my favorites on the shelves, which ones I was drawn to, and I think Regina, this is one of your favorites too. Who Left the Light On? Again, translated from the French by Emma Ramadan. That's right. Yes, and from it's an amazing kind of celebration of creativity and difference. And it's published by Restless Books. And I think, again, to go back to what Regina mentioned, we also wanted to highlight the work being done by publishers, right? Often smaller presses. So Restless Books is headquartered here in Amherst. And it's a really beautiful book. I mean, Restless also just won, one of their books won the Batchelder Award for 2022 for Temple Alley Summer. So again, celebrating the books and the people behind those books, the publishers behind those books too. In the Meadow of Fantasies, another favorite. This just, it's translated from the Persian by Nushin Safaku, by Sarah Khalili. Right. Yes. And this also just won I think the Batchelder honor winner. Right. It's a really fantastic story of a girl's kind of escapade into a land of these mysterious horses. It's just wildly imaginative. A really, really beautiful book. So I'm going to pass it over now that you've kind of seen in a little bit more detail these themes and some examples from each of these themes. I'm going to pass it over to Caroline, one of the students in Regina's Translation Roots course, to talk about all the work that they did, because they really did that work of reaching out to these different publishers, telling them about the exhibition, inviting them to be a part by donating books to the show. So I'll pass it over to Caroline to tell you more about all the work that they did.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And thank you so much for having me and including me on this panel today. Yeah, as David said, my name is Caroline. I am a current senior English and Spanish major at Amherst College. And I am one of the 7 students who had the opportunity to collaborate with Regina and the Carle to create the exhibit. Pictured here, this is our class from when we visited the Carle back in October of 2021. And before I begin, I would just like to quickly acknowledge my classmates and their contribution to the exhibit, and maybe put some faces to some names I'll be mentioning throughout. So quickly from left to right, they are Elizabeth Tran, Caitlin Wisda, Raylan Tanciatco, myself, Augusta Weiss, Olive Amdor, and Monica Diaz. Thank you so much to all of them. Yeah, so curating this exhibit in tandem with studying the work of literary translators like New York-based Edith Grossman and Barcelona-based Javier Calvo, as well as these kind of like giants or these figures of translation like Jose Marti, Julia de Burgos, even Cervantes. This equipped us as a class with this knowledge of translators and their work and multilingual writers and their importance in our current literary landscape. And then with that education, we were able to create this exhibit that doesn't just simply aim to put works in translation on display, but also aims to give people resources and quite literal tools that they can use to build their own understanding and appreciation of translators and translation. And so in addition to discussing literature and our other readings and all that classic college classroom stuff, we worked together to create the exhibit. The course was conducted in Spanish, so all communication between myself, my classmates, Regina, that was all done in Spanish. But of course, we were always in communication in English with the Carle, with publishers, actually looking at the books themselves. And so we ourselves were constantly working with multiple languages, which really heightened this experience for us that we could, in practice, see multiple languages at play and also be presenting them on the pages of the books in the exhibit itself, and that was really important for us. So without further ado, our roles as students included welcoming translator and translator educator guests to our class, like Patricia, creating the book list for the exhibit, coming up with the title, the main theme, and the subsections, drafting ideas for the look and the feel of the exhibit, creating social media posts, writing text for the Carle website, and being in contact with the publishers to acquire the books and collaborating with David and Courtney on the vinyl texts. And those were my two main roles. Next slide, please. Great. Additionally, my classmates and I were tasked with creating various educational resources, both on-site for visitors who are able to go to the reading library and see the exhibit, but also online so that it can be accessible for people who aren't able to see it in person. And so keeping both in mind that wide age range of the Carle's visitors and also the role of parents and educators, we wanted a range of hands-on activities and resources for everybody, such as a reading guide for parents and all adult co-readers, and a try-translation drawing game activity, which I'll talk about shortly. And those two specifically are available online on the Carle's website. And with the help of the UMass Amherst Translation Center and the sponsorship of the Carle and Amherst College and Regina, those two resources are available in English, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish. And I'll reiterate that in a bit, but yeah. Next slide. As David mentioned earlier, one of the resources that we have is this guiding or interpretive text that you see typically on the walls of any exhibit. We consider this an on-site resource. And as I mentioned, this was one of my main roles, was to collaborate with Regina and David and Courtney to create this text. And as short and simple as it might seem, deciding what language to use to make translation visible and understandable for visitors who are both, like Courtney said, 2.5 feet tall, and also visitors who might be grandparents of visitors at the Carle is actually really challenging. And we wanted to make sure that that concept of translation was legible, but still precise, trying not to use words like original, source, target, rewrite, for example, or any other word that's commonly used that oversimplifies the process of translation. So here on the slide, you can see the final intro text, and this will be the first thing that visitors see on the walls when they walk into the reading library and start to explore the exhibit. Next slide. Yeah, now I'll get into the thick of it, describing the activities that my peers and I came up with. The first two activities I'll be talking about are on-site that visitors can do themselves in the reading library. The first of which is called Take a Closer Look, and it is a search or scavenger hunt through a book activity. As Regina mentioned, something we thought a lot about as a class was how and where, or if, in some cases, translators are credited on the physical book, whether the name is on the cover, on the title page, or potentially somewhere else. We were thinking a lot about how translated books also display text on the page, as David was talking about earlier, in terms of a monolingual versus a bilingual book. Which language is above the illustration, below? Are they side by side? So this scavenger hunt, created by my peers Raylan and Augusta, not only encourages visitors to find the names of translators and see the different languages on the page, but it also encourages them to think about how words, illustrations, translation, all of this is functioning together in a single work. Yeah, so as you can see, one of the steps of the scavenger hunt is to find the name of the translator. And so hopefully that this is quite easy for a visitor to do, but in some cases it isn't. And that can be a learning moment about the visibility of translators and their work for someone interacting with the activity. Okay, next slide. Yeah, here's the, oh, I love this one. Here's the construction site activity. We created this and it's available in the library based on our course reading, actually. We read Javier Calvo's El fantasma en el libro La vida en un mundo de traducciones, or in English, The Ghost on the Page, Life in a World of Translations. In his book, Calvo describes the process of translation in a lot of ways, but one section in particular that stood out to our class, and more specifically my classmate Olive, who created the activity, was an excerpt in which he described the process of translation in terms of Legos and building blocks. In this section, Calvo writes that traducir un libro o cualquier tipo de texto viene a ser como reconstruir una casa de Lego con las piezas de otro juego de construcción. Or in English, translating a book or any kind of text is like rebuilding a Lego house with another kind of building block. So essentially, Calvo is saying that translating something into a different language is like building a house according to a Lego plan, but actually using a different set of building blocks. And as you can see, the construction site activity is just that. Visitors are encouraged to use wooden building blocks, so not Legos, in the reading library to build a house made out of Legos that they see on the sheet. And the hope then is that in reflecting on the similarities between their house and the Lego house on the sheet, that visitors may learn about how translation works, even in a theoretical sense, and even for children of a wide age range. Next slide, please. And the third and final activity is Try Translation, a drawing game, also created by Olive, is available both for visitors at the Carle and online on the Carle's website. And it's similar to the construction site activity in that it encourages visitors to think about translation in a theoretical context, again, specifically the role of the translator while still being fun. So as you can see here, the activity is basically you get the sentence, the friends have lunch in the park, I think is, yeah. And the idea is that you draw your interpretation, your illustration for that sentence, and then you compare with a friend. And after comparing drawings, the hope is that kids, parents, and educators will be able to understand how many different drawings can be made from just the one sentence. And how many different translations of the same text there can be. For example, how many friends do you have? Are they sitting on a bench? Are they at a picnic table? What are they having for lunch? Is it sunny? Is it, hopefully it's not rainy, but there are all these creative decisions more or less. And then the hope is that they can understand that there will be as many possible translations of a single text, or in this case, the sentence, as there are translators. And again, this file that I think has been sent in the chat, is available online on the Carle's website, and for any parents or teachers who would like to use it, and it's in English, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish. Next slide, please. In addition to the book list for the exhibit, my classmate Augusta wrote this amazing reading guide for parents, educators, and all adult co-readers that interact with the exhibit, whether that be in the library itself or exploring the book list online. We wanted to make sure that the exhibit is impactful far beyond the time that it is physically up in the reading library. And so we knew that one of the main ways we could do that was to encourage parents and educators to understand the importance of picture books in translation. And as Augusta puts it, the goal is to give adult co-readers tools to foster that understanding for both themselves and their children. The reading guide can be used with any translated picture book. It doesn't just have to be used with the book list for the exhibit. The guide, the vinyl text, the drawing activity, these are all available online in English, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish. Again, those are all available on the Carle's website. I think that's it for me. Lastly, I'd just like to thank my peers and all of the collaborators that came together to create this exhibit, and the resources, including the translators, illustrators, authors, and publishers that continue to support books in translation like Millet, Restless, Gecko, Enchanted Lion, Chronicle, Groundwood, Orca, and many others. So thank you for your work. And now I will turn it back over to the Carle to talk about upcoming programming.
Wow, thank you. Oh, I gotta put my video. Thanks, Caroline. I mean, amazing to see in one place all of the different resources that you and your classmates created. We're just so, again, thankful to have had this opportunity to work with you and learn with you. And I think what you said about, the importance of having these resources online and available in multiple languages, right? It's great to have these books in our space, right? But we want to promote beyond that, beyond the physical limitations and the time limitations of this exhibition. So I just love that we'll have these resources available to share in so many different ways. And I can see Regina beaming as you were speaking, Caroline. So thank you for all of your great work. Another way that we're going to engage and build on the momentum of this show is to continue doing some programming. So Tall Goldfine will be bringing her students back in to have some bilingual story times featuring books from Brazil. We have some Mandarin story time, bilingual story times in Mandarin and English that are coming up, hopefully starting this month. And growing again from there. I know it's still early in the process, but we're hoping to host a virtual program that will bring together some of the translators that are featured in the exhibition, as well as others for kind of a panel discussion. We're hoping to have a program with the author, illustrator, and translator of In the Meadow of Fantasies, which we highlighted, it sounds like in the chat, a favorite of, I'm not the only one who loves that book. So again, whether you can join us in person at the Carle or from wherever you are through our website, stay tuned because we're hopefully going to have some more programming in the next 3 or 4 months around this show. And I think from there, if anyone still has time, we'd be happy to chat some more with any questions building off the amazing conversation in the chat.
Yeah, can I just come on? And this is Sophie from the Center of Book Cultures and Publishing. And I just kind of wanted to say thank you so much to all of our speakers today for such fascinating talks and also for collaborating together on this amazing exhibition. I mean, there's been so much excitement about it already in the chat. I can really see that everyone's getting really excited, and there's so many different levels on which it works and it's so thoughtful. It was just amazing. And I loved in particular your kind of multi-sensoral approach to thinking about how to explain translation and make it visible, seeing it, talking about it, dancing and touching and constructing. So really, really impressive. And, and now I'm just really curious to know how the little 2.5 foot visitors get on with it. And I'm sure there's going to be loads and loads of questions in the chat. So I'm going to just sneak in a very quick one. And it's more of a kind of a desire, a wish than a question. It's just, how much do you think this you can kind of capture and kind of keep and preserve and show online? And that's a very selfish, I'm here in London and I'm not going to be able to get out there, but it just looks incredible and such an amazing resource in so many ways. So anyway, thank you.
When and Regina, you might have wanted to respond to that, but I'll just add another thing that Regina and her students are working on is a web article about the process of working on this exhibition. So that will also be in the works that we hope to be able to put on our website, and which will then live on our website, which we're really excited about.
I do have some questions from the chat if we're ready for those. I will also selfishly sneak one in here. I'm the PhD student who's studying the Outside In World collection with Sophie at the CBCP in Reading. And I'm American, as maybe you can hear, but I ended up in the UK studying translation mostly because there was so much more of it over there and so much more at the kind of higher education level. So it's so cool to me to see all of this going on now at the 5 colleges area. It just sounds like a really exciting time to be over there. So very cool. I had a lot of questions in the chat, but they did sort of fall under some themes. So I'm going to consolidate a little bit. The big one, there were a lot of questions about different specific languages. So I guess a lot of us are wondering, how were the books curated? How did you come to put together this collection? Where did they physically come from? How are they selected? Whether that's about languages, specific titles.
I would be happy to start on this one, and then anyone can jump in. I think the short answer is that basically each student initially, so there were 7 of us, had, I guess it was 5 picks. We got to pick 5 titles of books translated into English. And then in addition to David, Courtney, and Regina's picks, we created this kind of initial long list. And then from that long list, we had to very unfortunately cut down a little bit, literally just because of space and sometimes time restrictions. And then from that list, acquiring the books was a matter of being in contact with publishers to donate to the exhibit. And so we were really thankful that a lot of publishers like Restless and Orca and Gecko were really excited about the exhibit as well, and donated copies of the books to the reading library and sent them over to the Carle to be put on display for the exhibit.
And I would just add, Helen, you mentioned this in the chat, that, this exhibition, it's a living exhibition. And I think that was probably a challenge where we're working with the class. We wanted to make sure each student had a book, from their selection represented that exhibition, but we're also seeing new translated books, continuing to come out that we're really excited about. I think even, just like a week or so when we were talking about this webinar, David was saying, oh my gosh, did you see this book? It just came out, but we've already completed the book list, but there are already so many books that are being published and continue to be that would be a perfect addition to this exhibition.
So can I ask, will these books now remain part of the library? Is that the idea? So they're part of the permanent collection there, but they're currently being highlighted in this exhibition? Very cool. And we've had a few other questions. One that's, I think, maybe for Patricia, that's an outside in world one. Early on, someone asked, how can one participate / contribute to the database, talking about the outside in world collection. So I'm not sure how you want to answer that, Patricia.
Yes, thank you for the question. And if my colleague Deborah Halford is here, she is the co-founder and she manages the database, and she actually enters all of the books and receives the books and sources them. So Deborah, if you're here, feel free to pop on. But I can say contact us. So we'll put in the chat. Well, first of all, thank you for your interest in helping Outside In World. And right now, we are reviewing the books pretty much in-house. Deborah is reviewing them and then entering the books in the database and reviewing them. Or our intern Katie Hurwitz is now reviewing the books that are coming from the US. So, and we're also learning a lot from World Kidlit, whose co-founder Ruth Amazai-Kemp is here as well, and she also keeps a kind of running list of all new books that are translated. But contact us, because having some ability for others to put books in the database is something that we're looking toward. Thank you.
And then another question, someone has asked, are all of the books, and this would be referring to the exhibit, under Creative Commons? I'd love to share them around the world with Global Forum for Literacy. So I'm not sure if anyone can answer that from the Carle, maybe.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know if we checked to make sure that all the books. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, I wonder what, I think that was Fiona who asked that, what kind of sharing you're looking at, because I would imagine if you wanted to share the list and the information about the exhibit, that would be definitely something that you could do. And I will mention in that vein that there have been a lot of great links shared, more information about the exhibit, the full list of titles and everything, that's all in the chat. So if you're looking to share about this and get that out there, I hope everyone will go look at what's been put in the chat. Let's see what else I have as far as questions. I did have one myself. Did you differentiate between bilingual and monolingual translated books at all? Did you sort of, or books that were written, you know, purpose written to be bilingual versus books that were translated later, or if that's something you discussed at all?
I can answer that one. And of course, Caroline and David and Courtney, if you have anything else to add. So as I said earlier, we kind of started searching for the books first, and then we were like simultaneously coming up with the sections. And I think I was kind of surprised that the titles the students kept bringing were bilingual and multilingual books. And then for like a moment, I thought, oh, like, are these translations? What's going on? Like, this is kind of not what I had in mind. We need to get the English readers to read stories from other places, right? But then I thought, well, of course, you know, our class was in Spanish, and it would probably seem odd that in this exhibit to not have languages other than English present, even though we know that we were trying to get more English readers to read and to learn other languages. So then it just became even more important to have a representation of languages other than English, because without the different languages, we wouldn't have translation, and without translation, we probably wouldn't be here today. So so that was important to consider, that the students, for them, looking for translated books meant kind of bringing in the visibility of the other languages. So I think in our final book list, it's just in the C languages section where we have bilingual and multilingual books. And that was just, you know, the point of that section is to be able, I think, to you know, there was like returning to translation as giving people language access, but also translation, of course, is an important opportunity to give people access to language, to inspire them and to broaden their world. So with that in mind, we kept thinking, okay, we have to make other languages visible. But then I think that was the hardest section from my point of view to articulate how that section C languages dealt with translation, and how to articulate that for all of the possible visitors that the Carle could welcome in. So I think I answered the question in the long way, but
yes, thank you. Just going to see what else we've got here as far as questions. Someone, I'm not sure they really asked this, but it sort of sounded like they were asking it, whether the languages that were in the exhibit, I think it sounds like they were just selected due to what you're interested in, but whether they particularly reflected the languages in the community, whether that was sort of something you were thinking about or not.
I think a lot of us students, because we had done the research previously about what were the most commonly spoken languages in the in Western Mass and in the 5 college area, we had this kind of knowledge in the back of our heads of, you know, what different visitors at the museum might be familiar with, and what language they consider translated language or what language they are most comfortable operating in. And so I think, also just naturally it being a Spanish class and all of us being Spanish students, we have this kind of inclination towards Spanish language texts, but we also were looking for languages that reflected our local area's population. And so that's how some languages kind of might appear more frequently than others in the exhibit.
And I would add to that, in a way, as we were talking with the class about book selection, and David, I don't know if you feel the same way, it was almost comforting to know that we kind of had the same challenges we had when internally we worked on book exhibitions. We all have favorites, and we all have ones that we really hold on to. But as David said, we had sort of limited space on those ledges. So we knew kind of the number that we were aiming for, but there were just so many great ones. So we might have the list, and then we'd kind of step back from it, look at it again, and kind of realize, as Carolyn said, oh, do we have maybe too many translated from this language? Or let's take a global look at this. What is missing? Do we have maybe a variety of translators represented, a variety of publishers represented? So there were a lot of different layers to looking at that book list. And I think it was mentioned in the chat, German ended up not being one of the languages. It probably was on one of our original lists, but we're just narrowing it down was very difficult.
Thank you. Ruth also asks, is there any prospect of the exhibition touring the US?
If I just jump in, I love this question, and this is kind of what I dream about when I'm walking, is that for me, the focus was of course the books. All the books are beautiful. I love all the books, but I think out of all the things I could put my energies most into was, how do we present translation for a general public? That could, be like a bunch of PhDs coming into the room, and then a bunch of, preschoolers from the Early Learning Center across the road. So that's where my energy went. And what I see that we've created is that the different sections could travel anywhere, and then we could invite people in to populate the sections. And then this way we're expanding. Who are the translators? What are the languages? And what are the books? So I think it's a model that could be used in schools, in other libraries, anywhere, in your house. And here we have the model. Now go meet some translators. Go check out books that show languages, and just go check out some really great recently published literature in translation that treats translation in a very careful way.
Very cool. And we had another mention about the Bologna Book Fair. Whether there are any plans to take it there? You guys have done such an incredible job. This is really like an outstanding example. So I can see why people are hoping to see you other places other than in Amherst. We also have a request for Seattle.
I just want to note that, one of the things that we've all been encountering in our pandemic lives is some of the silver lining that we've all been able to join together across these geographic spaces today in a way that we probably wouldn't have 2 years ago. So the fact that we can do this, how do we share these books in virtual spaces while also, again, recognizing the beauty of these books as physical objects, I think is something that keeps coming back. As democratic of a source as picture books are, right? Even that has its limitations in terms of traveling. And just thinking about how amazing, I'm not sure who is tuning into this program and using some kind of translation service, right? We've shared this, all of our speakers have been speaking in English or Spanish. So thinking about how even we have the books or resources, how do we continue to make those accessible through language, as well as all the ways that Regina just mentioned in other spaces?
We definitely have people tuning in from all over the world here, so I hope that they will get in touch and use those resources and get creative. All of those who are asking to have it other places, I hope that we can make that happen one way or the other. Helen Wang's got some interesting ideas for International Translation Day, doing sort of multiple versions of this kind of across countries or across the world, different places. So yeah, definitely some very cool conversations to be had. And we have another link from Courtney of online exhibitions from the Carle, although they're not translation specific. That's pretty much all I've got as far as questions from the chat. Everyone was very enthusiastic. A lot of links also shared to other projects related stuff in there. So if you've been keeping an eye on that, there's quite a lot. But yeah, thank you so much. That's what I've got.
And I'll say a thank you from outside in world before Sophie closes us out, and to say, let this be an invitation, right, to begin, right, from where we are right here and now, right, from all the work that the Carle has done with Regina and her class and Caroline. Oh my God, can we say something about the new generation? Amazing. And so let this be an invitation. If there's not a book in German, okay, where are the books from German, right? If we get this all the time in bilingual books, why not this language? Well, let's get this started, right? And we know we need resources, but we first need the connections between each other in this community. So let that be a start for, if we can't tour and scale this exhibit, to grow exhibits in other parts of the United States and the world, right? So that's how this happened, right? It came together locally. So yeah, and thank you to everybody. Thank you, amazing, amazing speakers. Thank you, everybody who attended, all your brilliant engagement in the chat. Thanks from outside in world.
Yeah, how can I kind of add to that, really, other than thank you so much to our speakers for having given up their time to come and talk to us, and thank you everyone for tuning in from across the world. It's been really kind of humbling and exciting in that respect, and I do kind of look forward to seeing this growing as well, like Patricia said. So I'll kind of let everyone kind of say their thanks in the chat and leave. I'll be staying on a little bit more to say goodbye, but thank you once again to Courtney, to David, to Regina, and to Caroline, and for such wonderful, wonderful, wonderful contributions, and congratulations on your amazing exhibition, and good luck with the opening today. So thank you.